YouTube family. Hello, YouTube. Hope you all are well. Welcome to the Read Daniel Favors Show experience. Because it's Wednesday and because this is the 10 o'clock hour, we have a lot happening, so we are not going to be before you long. Just have some news that you need to be aware of, some things you need to know so that we can all do the work of making sure we are as prepared for what's coming as necessary. Now, I talk about this first story a lot more in my podcast episode, which will be out later today. Remember, that is called Lurie Breaks It Down, which I do every day at 6 a.m. for your inspiration, your moments of gratitude, and at 2 p.m. for the news that you can use. Some of the things that we are going to talk more about in the podcast episode than we are right now, but I just want to mention is number one, the fact that I'm very concerned about what's happening with Gen Z and their finances. And I heard this morning for the first time financial news analysts using the word recession in a way that indicated, holy crap, there's actually one that might be happening like right now. And that's interesting because, as I said in the podcast, it's a shift that I noticed similar to how I noticed the shift in the weather. Like when September hits, it gets cooler in the morning, right? And so there's even if it's very, very hot during the day, in the morning and the evenings, at least in the Northeast, it's a lot cooler than it is in other times of the summer. And that's important because that shift indicates that we are going into a new era. And the shift I'm now hearing in economic prognosticators and the people who study these things indicates that, yeah, it's no longer ignorable. And the 6 months where we have had companies that said, we're going to eat these costs, we're going to try to absorb the tariffs, they're not doing that no more because their obligation is not to you, the consumer, their obligation is to the shareholders, and the shareholders are tired of eating those tariffs. And so they are now going to be, just in time for the holiday season, raising those prices. And those of you who are still doing school shopping, Godspeed and go with you. But one of the reasons this is a real problem is because Gen Z isn't just one of the most exposed in terms of financial distress. They are also the group, the generation that is doing something that is pretty extreme in order to resolve it. They're already tapping into their retirement funds. I want you to think about how young Gen Z folks are. We're talking people in their early 30s and 20s. Is it maybe even mid 30s? I don't remember. Between Gen Z and millennials, it's a lot going on. I have a Gen Z and a Gen Alpha in my household, so it's a lot. Point is, these are young people, young adults, and they are dipping already into their paltry retirement savings, not to go on vacation, not to buy avocado toast, which is what y'all used to say the millennials were doing, and that's why they couldn't afford a house. Gen Z is dipping into their retirement savings to buy food, to pay for groceries, to perhaps pay for rent, and yes, to pay down debt, but they have to pay down the debt because the debt is killing them financially. And this is at the same time that right now, we just had in the month of August, repayment for student loans are kicking back in. And now your late payments for your medical issues or any bills that you incur as a result of your health concerns can now also, they're going to go back on your credit reports. We're seeing student loan repayments and the failure to repay going back on credit reports. And when you get a negative hit on your credit report, it is going to make the cost of borrowing that much more expensive. So this is something, again, I go into much more detail about in the podcast episode today. Lurie Breaks It Down. Please make sure that you check that out. And the other challenge that we're facing today is the onslaught of the news. Okay, first of all, shout out to China's president, Xi Jinping, because he has gathered all the new cool kids in China. They all there right now. And very few members of the West are there. One of the reasons so few members of Western countries are there, most particularly these United States, is because according to President Xi Jinping, the West is in alignment with Ukraine and China is in alignment with Russia. You know who is in China right now? Russian President Vladimir Putin. You know who else is in China right now? North Korea's President Kim Jong-un, who, yeah, you can call him a dictator, but we got a Trump. So, 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other. But basically right now, China, I think right at this moment, is having this massive march and parade, like a real military parade, not the big boy Trumpy parade that took place in D.C. Just a couple of weeks ago. Actually, I kind of think this whole effort he's instituting with the National Guard is sort of like his effort to revive the big boy birthday parade that he didn't really feel justified in, but whatever, that's another issue. And one of the reasons this is important is because in addition to the fact that Cuba is in China right now, Slovakia is in China right now, Serbia is in China right now, and 26 other global South nations, this realignment of the international world order is happening in real time. And nobody gives a damn what is happening with Donald Trump, including the fact that everybody thought that there was going to be a different bit of news that came out yesterday. Because remember, the man had been missing for a very long time. Cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs had been missing. The cuckoo in chief, Chief McTankles, whatever we're calling him these days, Mango Mussolini. Although someone did remind me that mangoes are one of God's best inventions, that and watermelon. And so we should not be using a mango fruit name for this version of wannabe Mussolini. So I've got to work on that because I agree. Mangoes and watermelons, best fruits ever. But moving on. The point is that right now, There are a lot of people who thought your man's had already met his maker. And then he showed up and clearly had not met his maker. But then he starts talking and talking and talking. He did this press conference yesterday. And one of the things that he was talking about is the fact that he's done a whole lot, like bomb a allegedly a narco trafficking ship off the coast of Venezuela. Now, I, for one, do not recall a declaration of war as against Venezuela. That's number one. Number two, how are we supposed to know it's really a narco trafficking ship? For all we know, it could have been a boat headed to Jeffrey Epstein's island. We just don't know because you bombed it. And that is often seen as like an act of war. Like when you go bombing ships off the coast of somebody else's land, like ain't that seen like as a hostile situation? Like what is happening right now? But then, y'all, I remembered. Y'all remember when Volodymyr Zelensky, who's the president of the Ukraine, had come to the White House and he had to bring all the European leaders with him because the last time he came to the White House solo, J.D. Vance and Donald Trump tried to play him like a fiddle. And so he brought the European nation leaders with him. And remember what he said in that conversation? He talked about the fact that because the Ukraine was at war, according to the Ukrainian constitution, they couldn't have elections because in a declaration of war, you can't have, when there is a war that is being actively promulgated in Ukraine, their constitution says you have to suspend elections. What's your man say? Your man's was like, oh, so if there's a declaration of war, we can't have an election? Fool, that ain't what the American Constitution say. That's what the Ukrainian Constitution say. But it's just curious to me that one of the next comments he made was something along the lines of, I guess I'll just have to start a war and then we can see what we can do here, huh? This man is insanely protective of his right to be a dictator, and we should just all be aware of that because we should be asking questions like, if you're going to just be bombing ships because you said it's a narco trafficking trip, and he said it was a narco trafficking ship that was connected with this gang called Tren de Agua. Now, I don't know a whole lot about Tren de Agua, but I do know that every time Donald Trump's administration tells us something about Tren de Agua, it be on some bullshit and it don't be true. So you said that this was a Tren de Agua narco trafficking boat. You bombed it without any prior authorization. And like, why wouldn't you just have the Coast Guard arrest them? Like, ain't that what the Coast Guard do? Ain't they the police of the oceans? Like, why wouldn't you just track them and have the Coast Guard arrest them? Why wouldn't, like, where was the judge? Where was the jury? Where was the evidence? We just supposed to take your cuckoo for Cocoa Puff's word on it after you had been missing for over a week and the whole world thought that the champagne they had chilling on the ice was going to actually get popped? I'm just saying that's some weird shit. And it feels like an aggressive, like, war starting tactic. It is very concerning. I got a whole nephew right now who is, God help me, joining the military. So I am concerned. I am concerned. And that's not the only thing I'm concerned about. I'm also concerned about what's going to happen later on today because even though apparently the White House has announced that there's going to be a plane flyover, like some sort of aerial show, I think that they announced that because right now, and maybe even in the next 4 minutes, maybe not quite right now, but can somebody check? I believe that there is supposed to be a 10:30, it may not be 10:30, but there was initially scheduled a press conference for today where Jeffrey Epstein survivors, people who had survived all the things that had happened to them as a result of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, who is now probably playing tennis at tea time because she's been moved from a very maximum security prison-ish to a very club light, club med sort of prison situation. And remember, Ghislaine Maxwell was the madame. She was the pimp. She was the pimpstress of the pimp, Jeffrey Epstein, and possibly Donald Trump, allegedly, according to the reports. But anyway, Representative Thomas Massey out of Kentucky, Representative Ro Khanna out of California, and a couple of others gathered a number of the survivors yesterday so that they could testify in a closed hearing in front of congressional members. Now, we know that it must have been god awful what they were saying because people came out of that hearing distraught. And one of them, I almost felt a little bit of empathy for, even though I think she's a cold, heartless, terrible human being. And that was Nancy Mace, right? Nancy Mace leaves this meeting. Now, remember, Nancy Mace has never met an LGBTQ issue that she did not want to weaponize and profit from and use to destroy not black people. Although maybe, but used to destroy the gay community. She is somebody who weaponizes the fact that she herself is a survivor of assault and whenever someone has gone through assault, it is a terrible, awful thing. When you are a survivor, it's an empowering thing to be able to reclaim your power. But when you weaponize that experience in order to remove rights from other people who might also experience that sort of thing, you are a terrible, no good, very bad person. Some might call you a bitch, but that would be them. I would just be quoting what they are saying. Anyway, Nancy Mace comes out of this meeting distraught. She was having a whole ass panic attack. She was crying. She was weepy. She couldn't handle it because it was very traumatizing for her, which which makes sense because as someone who herself has had to survive something as awful as sexual assault, of course you are going to be emotionally destroyed at having to listen to that. Although I would suspect that she was also emotionally destroyed because when you are participating in the protection of someone who was accused of being the big pedophile in chief, like the big pimp pedophile, I'm just saying that would probably cause whatever angst you were already going to naturally feel if you were like in touch with your humanity to be exacerbated in some pretty significant ways. So she's going through some things. I don't know what's going to happen today, however, because today they are gathering all of the survivors back, and they're going to be telling their stories and telling them loudly. And we now have this effort in the House where essentially they have filed, Republican Thomas Massie of Kentucky has filed what's called a discharge petition. Now, a discharge petition is basically a way to say to the leader, the Speaker of the House, hey, man, MAGA Mike Johnson, I know you don't want to have this conversation because you up in Trump's nuts, but because you are the leader, technically we would have to go before you and get your permission in order to bring this thing to a vote. But we're going to use this other procedure that we got. It's called a discharge petition, and that discharge petition is going to allow us to bring this thing to a vote, whether you want to participate or not. All they need is 218 votes to get this discharge petition out of the House and then into the Senate, where it would still have to go through a vote there. But basically, it's a discharge petition that is trying to force the release of all the Jeffrey Epstein files. And that is important because it matters, right? It matters. But it also matters because we are also learning from a number of news outlets like the Tennessee Holler that Trump has been threatening other Republicans. So basically, he knows this discharge petition is going to be filed. He knows they're going to have a vote about whether or not they should release the Jeffrey Epstein files. So your man's is calling up Republicans and basically like, you can't vote for this thing. I don't want it. It's going to be a threat to Trump. Why would releasing the Jeffrey Epstein files be a threat to Trump? Isn't Trump the one who told us all that this was a Democratic hoax? Even though the Republicans for 11 years have been talking about the Jeffrey Epstein files, the Republicans ran on this shit. They said they was going to release it. They put Dan Bongino and Kash Patel, these people who had for years built their career on talking about the Jeffrey Epstein files and having to release them. Pam Bondi told us earlier this year that Jeffrey Epstein files are on my desk and I have them ready to release your presidency. And I'm just so glad because you are the most amazing, wonderful orange man I've ever served under. She didn't technically say those last parts, but that's sort of the energy that she was giving. Everybody know that y'all got the Jeffrey Epstein files. Why you just don't release them? Well, what your man's is now doing is calling up to Republicans and saying, if you vote for this discharge petition, it's a threat to Trump. Why is it a threat to Trump? I thought you said it was a Democratic hoax. And it only is a threat to Trump if you want all them Epstein file trial, them file pages. Now, if you want them file pages, then yeah, it's a threat to you, but we should be asking why that is. Final piece of news. We had mentioned a few days ago talking about this concept known as jury nullification. You guys remember that? That's this process where even if the jury says, yeah, the prosecution met their burden, they definitely proved guilt beyond reasonable doubt. But we don't like this case because we know that if you prosecuting this black boy, and we know that if this was a white boy, you wouldn't be prosecuting like this. You done prosecuted this black person, and we know if this was a white person, you wouldn't be doing all this. You done prosecuted. And so jury nullification basically says you, the prosecutor, yeah, you prove your case, but we don't agree with the fact that you are using your power in this way, so we are not going to move forward. Well, it's taken off. There was another case in Washington, D.C., where a woman had been accused of posting very threatening and actually kind of serious, according to the press release, really serious threats against Donald Trump. And they filed suit against her, the Department of Justice. And the grand jury was like, yeah, we see the evidence. It do look like she posted that. It do. And that is very threatening language. But you know what we going to do? We going to nullify because we got other shit to do. And so we are seeing what feels like the beginning of a pattern where juries are learning their power and they're saying, you are unrighteously prosecuting this person. We think that's bullshit. And so we going to do our job of holding you in check. I'm a fan. I'm a real big fan. Anyway, we got to go to commercial break. On the other side of it, Rick Martin is going to be joining us. I'm so excited to speak with him. Every time we speak with him, we learn more about business, and he and I have been working on some things. I'm just very excited to speak with him. And then Dr. Rob Davidson is going to be joining us in the second hour to talk about his very serious concerns about what's happening with medical policy in this country. He's been over nearly 3 decades in the emergency room, and he has a lot of policy concerns about what your man's RFK and them is doing. And so I'm looking forward to speaking to him as well. In any event, right now we got to go to commercial break. YouTube, we appreciate